A child does best, on average, when raised by biological married parents.
I will fight for Australia's rights, our freedoms, our way of life.
I'm an anti-feminist because I think it's oppressive, I think it's anti-male, I think it's anti-femininity.
Now, it may be a very weak Brexit, but I tell you what, Brexit of any kind and leaving those treaties as well.
That's the best ever interview. Michael Parkinson, you got nothing on this bloke.
G'day and welcome to Pellowe Talk. I'm Dave Pellowe, and what we try and do on this show is intersect politics, culture and truth. We're totally open, and I try to have guests on who are open to being challenged, and I'm certainly open to being challenged. But more than that, I want to actually explore issues that my audience and myself need a deeper understanding on. And so I try and get people on the show who are smarter than me, a lot smarter. I love hanging out with Ph.Ds, and today I have one of the best thought leaders in Australia, Dr. Stephen Chavura. Now, I've invited Dr. Chavura to the Church and State Summit, which is now just about 3 weeks away, maybe a little bit more than 3 weeks away, on the 22nd and the 23rd of February. Here in Brisbane. If you haven't got your tickets yet, make sure you do, but we're going to give you a bit of a taste test this morning. You can grab your tickets from churchandstate.com.au, as well as find out more about all the speakers and the program. It is a Christian conference, but everybody is welcome. We had a left-wing troll asking Lyle Shelton if he could come along, because he's a Muslim and a centrist, and the answer was, if you want to come to a Christian conference, be our guest. Everybody's welcome, because we're after truth. It's not, something that we're afraid of hard questions. We want tough questions, and there will be time for Q&A in there, as well as for respectful listening for everybody else that's there. But Dr. Stephen Chavura is joining me today, and he holds a Ph.D. in the history of early modern English political thought. He's also a co-author of Reason, Religion, and the Australian Polity, a Secular State? Widely published in prestigious journals, his research interests include the history of political thought, church and state in history, one of my favourite topics, modern political philosophy, recognition theory, I'll have to ask him what that even is, and freedom of speech, which I'm also a big fan of. Dr. Chavura also regularly contributes to public debate in various online and print fora, as well as radio. Big fan of his articles in The Spectator and The Australian. Stephen, welcome to Pellowe Talk.
Thanks for having me back, Dave. Good to see you.
It's been a while since our last one. We'll have to make sure it's not a year in between drinks again next time.
Sure.
Now, your topic at the Church and State Summit, I just want to wet people's whistle. It's actually a huge topic, and we're going to give you 45 minutes, including time for Q&A. So really, it's just going to be dipping our toe in the water. But it is going to be a accessible kind of talk that anybody can enjoy. I definitely want first-time voters and people who aren't political nerds in the least, but your average blue-collar Aussie bloke down at the pub to be able to take a concept that he's heard of and heard the media and the politicians talking about, and maybe on Twitter, etc., but want them to make it accessible and understandable and demystify it for us all. So the topic that I thought you're perfectly suited for is the accusation that flies around a lot that we've got socialists and Marxists taking over Australia, and especially the Labor Party. We always knew the Greens were watermelons, green on the outside, red to the core. But exactly how real a threat is it? Is it just rhetoric that's useful? Or is there a real connection between the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917 and modern political thought?
Well, that's a great question. It is a big topic, and I'm really happy to be speaking about it. And as you said, it'll be a sort of what you might call cultural Marxism, or even sort of modern political ideologies 101 for, as you said, for those who are interested in such things but might not have the time to read a textbook or anything like that. So right. I'm hoping really to clarify the thought movements that are animating a lot of public debate and a lot of changes in Australian institutions and ways of thinking today. But your question was, is there some sort of connection between the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917 and sort of the things that are going on today? And the answer to that is definitely yes. There is no doubt that the ideas of Karl Marx have survived the demise of Soviet communism.
Wow.
They didn't die with the death of Soviet communism, and they certainly extend well beyond modern China and North Korea. Now, this term that is frequently used is cultural Marxism. Mm-hmm. And cultural Marxism is probably a term that was coined around about the 1990s, and it indicates a type of thinking that tends to divide societies and indeed the whole world up between oppressors and victims. Okay. And you see a lot of that today in all sorts of public debates, whether it's about race, whether it's about gender. But a lot of this goes back, beyond, back farther than the Bolshevik Revolution, to the thought of Karl Marx himself. Mm-hmm. Karl Marx was, of course, a very famous German 19th century philosopher, social theorist, and economist, who famously wrote with his colleague Engels that all hitherto history is the history of class struggle. In other words, the whole of history is struggle between at least two groups of people, one always trying to dominate over the other. Mm-hmm. And the whole point of history is for sort of the underclass, what Marx and Engels called the proletariat, the working class. The whole point of history is for them to overthrow those who are dominating them, take control, and bring about this sort of utopian society of equality, which classical Marxism called communism. Okay.
And is there, so basically the Bolshevik Revolution then was the uprising of the workers, the against the capitalists, the business owners, the industrialists?
Everyone, the Romanov monarchs, anyone deemed not part of the proletariat, not part of the working class, they were deemed as oppressors.
Right.
And now, why is this relevant today? Yep. We've all sort of been told that Marxism is a failed, dead doctrine, but in actual fact, what Marxism did is that it kind of transformed itself. I mean, this is one of the this is sort of the genius of Marxism.
Like Arnold Schwarzenegger in The Terminator, turning into Quicksilver and then reforming without a scratch on him.
That's exactly what I was about to say, but you stole my thunder.
You set up the metaphor so beautifully. It was already there.
Schwarzenegger-like. Marxism it sort of reinvents itself. And so when the sort of classical political economic Marxisms proves a spectacular failure in the late 80s and very early 90s with the collapse of Marxist regimes, especially around the European world, mm-hmm. Marxism itself sort of chugged along, but without the emphasis on sort of class and economic struggle, and more with an emphasis on different kinds of identity struggles.
Ah, yeah.
And so Marxism really starts to come into some serious disrepute by the late 1960s because of violent Soviet incursions into European countries that proved no threat to Soviet Russia. Mm-hmm. And so the Marxists used to always claim that Marxism is a peaceful ideology, but when they saw how non-peaceful Soviet Russia was, Marxism started to lose a lot of credibility. But another intellectual movement started to rise, particularly in the 1970s, which in some ways borrows from Marxism in its view of struggle and power. Yep. And that is a movement that we come to know as postmodernism.
Yep. Tell me, just talking about Russia, what's the nexus between socialism and Marxism? Are they interchangeable terms? Are they polar opposites, vastly different, mutually exclusive, or is there a lot of crossover?
They're definitely not mutually exchangeable terms. They're not synonymous. So, for example, Karl Marx was merely one of, and Marxism was merely one of many different kinds of socialism in the 19th century.
Okay.
And in the 19th century, socialism and communism tended to be used interchangeably a lot. They are used a lot interchangeably today, but the terms should generally not be confused. So, for example, in England, you had a tradition in the 19th century of sort of non-revolutionary socialism, which basically believed that you need to keep Parliament, you need to keep the government, but through reforms through the law, you should improve the conditions of the working class and you should redistribute the fruits of capitalism more evenly among the people. Now, that was a form of socialism, but it was not revolutionary Marxist socialism. And so one of the problems with modern debate is that socialism and Marxism tend to be conflated. What Marxism historically was, and this was sort of spectacularly demonstrated with the Russian revolutions and subsequent revolutions in Europe and in Asia, Marxism was the idea that the best way to social equality is not through sort of reforms taking place in the state. It's by abolishing the state, by abolishing government altogether, and bringing about ultimately a sort of anarchic society of communities where essentially things are shared according to people's needs, according to the famous maxim, from each according to his ability, to each according to his needs. So Marxism is potentially a far more radical doctrine than, say, socialism. So Jeremy Corbyn in the UK, Bernie Sanders in the US, they're kind of classical they're sort of classic English-style socialists. They don't want to abolish the state and create a sort of workers' revolution to overthrow all the existing institutions. But what they do want to do is make the state much bigger in order to redistribute things evenly.
Could that not just be a step towards the Marxist goal of destroying it? I mean, look at Venezuela. I mean, socialism is a path to destruction of the nation.
Well, I mean, I think whenever you...
It's okay to tell me I'm wrong.
No. I mean, whenever you try, historically, what you find is whenever you try to institute a socialist or more radically a Marxist state, the exact opposite of what Marx thought would happen happens. So for Karl Marx, what would happen is that the workers would take over and you'd have this intermediate period called the dictatorship of the proletariat, where the workers would take over the government, they'd take over the factories, but then after a while, when everything got sorted out, when the old regime was finally gotten rid of and people learned to appreciate communism, then the workers, the proletariat would step down from their positions of power and the government would disappear and people would sort of be in concord and they would share.
Kumbaya.
Kumbaya, exactly. But of course, historically what happened...
Oh, bless dear Karl's heart.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. But of course, historically what happened was instead of the state sort of getting smaller and sort of just evanescing away, disappearing, it got bigger and bigger and bigger, which is perfectly understandable because if you want people to behave like angels when they're not angels,
that's right,
then you'll just constantly have to be coercing them to be angels. Right. And because they will never actually be what you want them to be, the state can never go away.
That's
and that's historically what has happened. But to link this back up with some things that are
it's hilarious that they think that people who've got absolute power, the authority of a dictatorship would, let's step aside generously, gregariously, just with an open free hand. Like, no, comrade, let's get more power. Let's kill our enemies.
Yeah, and that's exactly what happened. And it's amazing the naivety of some of these 19th century radicals. And there were some radicals at the time that pointed out to Karl Marx, hey, this dictatorship of the proletariat, it's just going to stay forever.
Yep.
And Karl Marx just sort of wrote them off as, as intellectually inferior to him and
Yeah.
But history in actual fact proved Marx
Of course.
to be wrong.
Yeah, we just haven't done socialism right yet. That's why it's never worked.
course, that's right.
So the propagandists tell us.
That's right. But when you say to a socialist, "Oh no, we just haven't done capitalism right. We just need to perfect it," suddenly the logic of that stops working.
It's a good answer. I haven't actually heard that before, but where have I been? I'm sure it's look. Something that occurs to me is that the left like to accuse the right of being indistinguishable from Nazi fascists, and they basically say, look, that is the outcome, the manifestation of right-leaning ideology. But I think I like the libertarian scale of things rather than left and right. It's up and down. It's the extremists on both sides, left and right, want a really big government. And that comes with authoritarianism, telling you how you can think, how you can talk. We see the ideas of hate speech and banned speech coming in. But what a true conservative, a true Christian in my mind, really wants is the smallest possible size of government, and for socialism, but the voluntary kind of socialism, which the Bible calls charity. It's just love of your neighbor. Nobody's compelled to do anything, and not wanting to go too far down that track. The rejection of the idea that conservatives are fascists is, hang on, the last thing I want is government authority telling me or you how to live. I want the smallest government possible, not no government. I do see the need for some government, but I want the smallest government possible. I want for society to be accountable to each other. And I think ultimately this brings in the place of the church into society, is that democracy. And this can be useful for the democratic socialists who like to call themselves different from socialists. The difference is that no democratic model works without a moral people, without a virtuous people. And that's why Christianity in particular has been very, very useful for every successful, prosperous nation in history. Because whatever model you use, capitalism or socialism, it requires a good character at the base of it. And the fact that human character is not fundamentally good is why socialism is fundamentally democidal. It's going to kill the people.
Yeah. No, look, and again, I mean, socialism understood in that radical term that I mentioned, that radical way I mentioned earlier, you're absolutely right. I mean, at the heart of so many radical and what you might call leftist theories is this idea that human beings can be perfected. And it's central to Karl Marx's thought, and before Karl Marx, it's central to the thought of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who was very influential as a theorist in the French Revolution of 1789. And this philosophical view is essentially that human beings are corrupted by forces outside of them, by corrupt institutions, which means that if you can just get rid of the institutions that corrupt us, so if you can get rid of the way we're educated, if you can get rid of the economic system that corrupts us, if you can get rid of the kinds of governments that corrupt us, then we'll actually be the sort of altruistic people that these kinds of ideologies really kind of long for. And as you said, that's precisely, sort of paradoxically why these theories, which long for a kind of utopia, turn out to be such dystopias, because in order to make human beings the altruistic angels that these theories presuppose us to do, you just need a lot of coercion. You need a lot of coercion to do it. And of course, the coercion never, ever goes away.
Yeah, that's that authoritarianism that we must absolutely, and this is the thing, if you're of the centrist or leftist persuasion watching this, congratulations for a start. Secondly, fear authoritarianism, fear ceding any power from yourself to a government, because you don't know who's going to have that power after the next election. And this is I guess Jordan Peterson's great question is, we don't like hate speech, but who are you going to give the power to decide what is hate speech? That is the very dangerous thing.
That's exactly right. I mean, I'll certainly touch on this in my talk at the Church and State Summit. That, of course, in the abstract, of course, we hate speech. I mean, hate in itself,
Of course.
is a bad thing for the most part, unless you're hating a particularly murderous ideology, and then sure. But everyone hates hate speech, but of course, who defines what hate speech is?
Yep.
And you get definitions of hate speech which are quite narrow, and this is all in the hate speech literature, which I've looked at over the years. And some definitions of hate speech are quite narrow. So it's basically, speech that incites people to commit act of violence against other people based on their race or religion or whatever. And so, hate speech as incendiary speech to violence. Yeah, fine. I mean, I think we could all agree that that kind of speech probably should be banned. You don't want people going around encouraging other people to kill one another.
Right.
But of course, then in the literature, it gets very broad very quickly, and hate speech goes from just inciting people to be violent to inciting people to think. To say things that ridicule others, or inciting people to think deeply contemptuous thoughts and say deeply contemptuous things to other people. It's even been defined in terms of speech that would seek to deny people all sorts of choices in their lives that they would like to make, like anti-abortion speech has been defined as hate speech. So
hasn't it just a group of peaceful, dear old ladies basically offering counselling, care and concern is now deemed harassment and hate speech, and literally being outlawed in our nation. And even praying within 150 metres of an abortion clinic is deemed hate speech and being banned. This is the authoritarianism that goes just way beyond reasonability, and actual incitement to violence and actual assault are already illegal and should be prosecuted to the full extent of the law, and have been when they have happened on extremely rare occasions.
Extremely rare, yeah. And, to get back to yours and Peterson's point, the other thing we need to remember about government is that we often tend to think about government and the state as a kind of impersonal force. But we have to remember that public policy, laws, and government positions of influence are populated by people with ideas and ideologies. So the government is not an impersonal force. It is a collection of people who have agendas.
Worldviews and beliefs. And the kinds of people who will fight for their lives to get into positions of power, whether it's in the public service, whether it's in politics, whether it's in law and legislation and the interpretation of law, these people are not indifferent to how Australia looks. They don't fight their whole lives in order to get into positions not to do things, not to pass new laws, not to get into our educational institutions and try to form people's minds. They're getting into these positions, which is a long, hard slog from a career perspective, to make changes. And so we must start seeing the government less as some impersonal entity that is often a nuisance, and more in terms of a sort of battle site of ideas and agenda. Where people get into these positions, especially in politics, in order to refashion Australia in their own ideological worldview image. And the thing is, if you're not an agent of these sorts of cultural, political, legal, policy elites, if you're not an agent in there, you're a patient. That is, you're having to bear the brunt of these changes. It's your children who are going to be exposed to these ideas. It's you who are going to have to live a life confined within new laws that are passed according to particular worldview visions of what it is to be a human being and how we ought to live. Maybe a good metaphor would be drivers and passengers. You're either a passenger or a driver. There's only so many people who can have their hands on the wheel, and we have to know they have a plan in mind of where they're going to take us. And once they get in that seat of power, we're along for the ride.
Whether we like it or not, that's it. Whether we like, you can't just jump out of the moving vehicle.
Yep.
And these are the things that we're all going to be discussing at the Church and State Summit. We're not only going to be talking about, what are the ideas that currently animate policy and education and public debate in Australia and around the rest of the world, because Australia is influenced by other countries.
Yep.
But also, practically speaking, what can we do to have an influence ourselves and a counter-influence to some of these more harmful views, that, especially the ones that are entering into the schools? What can we do to have a positive counter-influence? And this is why the Church and State Summit is so important, and I'm hoping that a lot of people come along to it.
Yes.
Very important that we not just discuss these things and understand them, but that we get out there and try to help affect really positive change.
Well, that's right. It's very important that we, as voters, know exactly the agenda of the drivers that we're electing. As passengers, where do you want to take us? Because it's a myth to think that we're electing a pure kind of representative. These people represent themselves first and their electorate second. And I think that's a good thing. If I was ever, privileged to have a public office, I wouldn't be promising to do whatever the electorate wanted every single time. And I would certainly be accountable for the body of interviews and opinions that I'm putting out there now. People should elect somebody they identify with and relate to and say, what that person naturally thinks represents me. And that's why I'm trusting him, because or her, because the way they think, their values align with mine. They value life, they value family, they value liberty, they value economic conservatism, they value, patriotism and secure borders and national sovereignty, and they oppose, horrible things. And we're not going to micromanage every decision that they vote for during their term of office. And if during their term of office they fail to represent me, then I'm going to find a better representative next time round. But I think it's silly to expect a candidate to remove their mind and stop being themselves and, like some kind of automaton, just do whatever 50% plus one of the electorate recommends, because the majority have been wrong at times in various places in history. And it's easy to come up with an extreme example of what if the majority of people wanted such and such evil. Would you then feel obliged to do that even if it was against your conscience? And I think you're a coward if you say yes. I think you're a coward, and that's why I have no sympathy at all for people who dumped Malcolm Turnbull or Kevin Rudd. Like, your fates at the election are what you signed up for at the beginning of the last election. And so you have to do the right thing from here on in, not just do the thing that you think will get you in power. You have to be faithful to who you are and what you've done. And, following from the front is just ridiculous. So it annoys me. I understand why people think the candidate should do whatever the electorate wants, but I think it's a bit of a spoiled view of democracy. Have you got any thoughts on that little rant of mine?
No, it wasn't a rant at all. And what you said was said most famously by Edmund Burke.
Oh, really?
In the 18th century, he very famously said in a speech to his electors, I am not your delegate, I am your representative.
Wow.
I do not just go into Parliament and vote according to what 50 plus 1% of you want. And he said, I've got a mind of my own, I have values of my own, and you have elected me on that basis. And if I'm not on that, and if not on that basis, if we don't elect people based on their own, on our faith in their skills, based on our faith in their virtue and character and worldview, then anyone could take the place of a politician, because anyone can just vote according to what over half of their electorate wants.
Yes.
And it's the very distinction between a delegate and a representative. But the thing is, and to take this sort of back to your earlier comment about virtue and democracy, which is also sort of the connection between virtue and politics, is something that goes all the way back to the ancient Greeks. It was restated by people like John Stuart Mill and others in the 19th century, certainly by the American founding fathers, who believed that the only way that their republic could ever work is if the people were a virtuous and religious people, because what virtue, when you think of sort of the great virtues, they are things like self-restraint, an element of principled compromise, humility. That is, humility is not so much not believing anything because you think you could be wrong, but believing things, but knowing at the same time that you may not be right about it. And that means you've got to listen to other people. But it doesn't mean that you become skeptical about everything. It just means that you hold to things dearly, but not so tightly that you don't listen to others and that you're not prepared to give some ground. And when you take these things away in a democracy, when you take away the virtues, all you're left with is the numbers.
Yep.
All you're left with.
That's exactly my point. Is if that's the model of democracy you want, and I don't know if that's, I guess democracy can look like different things, but if that's the model you want, then why bother with a parliament at all? Why not just have an online poll every day?
Yeah, that's right. It'd be much cheaper.
Yep.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And there's a sense in which one of the problems with modern sort of political dialogue and modern public debate, and in some ways maybe modern politics, it's very much on display, maybe most on display in America. It's on display to a large extent in the UK. It's certainly evident here, is in a sense, some of the virtues of politics are still with us, but others have sort of gone by the wayside. So, for example, the virtue of sort of love of justice, that is still with us. No one out there says, "Oh, justice is bunk." No one out there claims that what they're trying to do has nothing to do with justice. We still love justice. So that virtue, sort of this preoccupation with justice, is still there. It's still very strong. Maybe in some ways it's never been stronger. But what has gone is the...
I'll let you finish, but I might disagree with that. But
Well, remember I said that the virtue of the love of justice, not necessarily justice itself.
Okay.
I mean, you can have two people who disagree strongly on what justice is, but they both at the very least think that they're pursuing justice. So, I mean, we could possibly disagree on it, but again, I think for the most part, you won't find a group on the left or the right who doesn't claim that what they're trying to do is to bring about a more just society. Now, whether their conceptions of justice are correct or not, that's another thing. But I would say that at least maybe a better way of putting it is sort of the love of justice. But the point is that justice is not something that has... the ideal of justice is still something that animates political debate. But what is gone now is humility. So when you have
let me agree with you on that, with this perspective. My definition of humility, or the definition I've heard that I think is something I personally aspire to, is the objective view of yourself. And we could apply it to your opinions and reality itself. The objective view of yourself is like, how does God see this? How does God see me? And so to say, I really don't have any talent or any skill at all is a false humility, because God looks at me and says, well, I've actually given you some talents. And at each of us, he's given us different gifts, and obviously made us all in his own image. And so to debase ourselves is a false, fraudulent kind of humility. But at the same time, seeing virtues in ourselves which don't exist is obviously a vanity. Being obsessed with those and that kind of vanity is terrible. So the struggle I have with, and this is something I've thought about often, is look, the left ascribe bad motives to people who disagree with them, and the right ascribe bad education to the people who disagree with them, as a generalization. So when I say I love justice, I think I'm being humble about it. I think I'm being objective and trying to go for it from God's view. But I think there's just a profound intellectual dishonesty in the left when they describe their pursuit of justice. As an example, I can agree with a leftist's value of personal autonomy and the right to choice as a justification for abortion. Abortion is morally completely wrong. So if anybody's never heard me talk on this before, don't confuse what I'm saying. I'm saying the basic argument they're using is right until you start testing it. It actually turns out that they're not pro-choice because they're only pro-choice for one person who's involved in that decision, and then they're only pro-one choice for that one person in that decision. And so they've got this facade of justice which they cling to, but in reality they're betraying everything about the nature of choice in the thing that they're going for. Like, well, if you're pro-choice, then let a woman have an ultrasound and let her have knowledge and let her have information on adoption and on all the other things, the support. So many women who have abortions say they wouldn't have had abortion if they just had been offered some kind of support. Heaps and heaps and heaps.
Yeah.
So where is the choice being offered those women? Don't tell me you're for choice because you've just clung to this word. So I actually don't believe you when you say that everybody values justice. And I know you tried to articulate that they value the idea of justice as opposed to justice itself. But then I don't even, it's just deluded. It's just, do they really value justice if all they value is the idea of justice? And I guess the answer is, of course not. But
yeah,
it's this. But then, I feel trapped in this intellectual thought experiment where they basically will then accuse us of the same thing. And you point out, hang on, you're not being intellectually honest. They just go, well, you're not being intellectually honest.
You more or less. You did the best thing that one can do in these circumstances. You asked questions and you answered them for yourself, and that was good. You did it very well. But the point that you finished on, where this could just go back and forth, the accusations of intellectual dishonesty, that's a good place to end that particular discussion, because what it shows is that accusations of intellectual dishonesty flying back and forth will never get you anywhere. At the end of the day, you have to attack the actual arguments. That's what you've got to do. And as you sort of said, left and right can sort of lapse into attacking the other person. So, classically, I would actually say the left see the right as undereducated and stupid, and the right see the left as kind of morally wicked. But in either case, you're not really attacking the arguments. And for all the social policy that guys like you and me would really question, that would be associated with the left, at the end of the day, you've got to attack the justifications for that policy. And I completely agree, actually, with your critique of sort of the pro-choice movement, because, as you say, it's not pro-choice at all. It's pro-one choice, which is by definition the very
a lack of choice.
A lack of choice. Yeah. But of course, what's going on is that in the public arena, it has to be said, it's not so much a debate that takes place; it's a war that takes place. And in any war, the last thing you can ever do is cede a little bit of ground. And so the great fear among pro-abortionists, and I should probably clarify pro sort of abortion on demand folks, is that if you give any ground...
I'm happy to be labelled as anti-abortion.
Yeah, sure, fine. But if you, in their minds, if you give any ground to the pro-lifers or to the anti-abortionists, then that could lead to more ground being given. And even if the ground that they want is actually quite reasonable, and they know deep down that it's quite reasonable, they still feel, because this isn't just some neutral academic debate, that this is an actual war for public policy and laws, that they cannot concede even the very reasonable requests that women just be informed about exactly what is in their womb and exactly,
and that's the real question to that debate, is what is it? I completely agree about the woman's rights to autonomy. Completely agree. Let's move now past that and talk about what are we talking about? What is in the womb?
But I mean, it's amazing that debate even takes place. I mean, that's a quaint debate because we've had ultrasounds for decades now. Right. I mean, just 2 days ago, I was on Facebook debating with someone on abortion, and this particular person said, "Well, it's okay to abort a fetus. It's okay to abort, a preborn baby because it's just, the old chestnut. It's just a clump of cells." Now, ridiculous. That view might have been reasonable if you, knew very little 60 years ago. But again, with ultrasounds, everyone's got access to ultrasounds, and now really incredible ultrasounds. It's totally indefensible view.
It's a very anti-science view.
It's totally anti-science. Completely, and you can only hold it in sort of by turning your face against science.
Yep.
But these views, they die hard. They take a long way to go because, again, the moment you concede that in actual fact we're dealing with a human being, a perfectly reasonable and true and scientific, proposition, then the great fear is, we're going to lose ground and it will just snowball and we'll lose abortion altogether. That's the great fear. And it's that mutual distrust in public, in the public confrontation of worldviews that leads either side to be unreasonable in certain instances. The abortion example is actually a really great one because, as you said earlier, what is more reasonable than to properly inform women as to exactly what they are doing and any alternatives that they may prefer if they knew that they were around.
Yeah, that's right.
Totally, and as you said also, totally in accordance with the emphasis on choice and autonomy.
Yep. Now, I'm going to make an assertion and you can correct me if I'm wrong or expand on if I'm right. To bring this full circle, abortion to me connects to Marxism because my understanding is that Karl Marx and Marxism has 4 goals: the destruction of nations, the destruction of private property, the destruction of religion, and the destruction of family. Abortion clearly is a manifestation of attacks on the sanctity of family. Discuss.
Yeah, no, well, look, I would certainly agree that a lot of the justifications for why we need abortion are very much tied in with what you would call Marxism and sort of the neo-Marxism of the 1960s and 70s, which basically asserts that, there are many ways in which we are oppressed. We can be oppressed economically, but we can also be oppressed sort of patriarchally by men and familiarly by the family. And the people being oppressed in this instance are women. And so what women need to be able to do is kind of what, the proletariat, the working class in Russia did in 1977. They need to overthrow their oppressors. And for women to do that, they need to overthrow not just, their oppressive husbands. Whoa, scary thought there. I'm in trouble. Overthrow the family. Yeah. And the way to overthrow the family is through, numerous things, but certainly abortion rights, which give a woman the ability to be able to control her reproduction. So I think the link there...
So the theory goes, allegedly, of course, she already has reproduced. Right.
Well, yeah, sure. But no, I think you're right to draw something of a connection there. But this is something I would also point out. Mm-hmm. Again, justifications for abortion were not just coming from, what you might call sort of radical feminists who had been influenced by Marxist ideas. So I put someone like Germaine Greer in that category. And when you read Germaine Greer's 1970 bestseller, The Female Eunuch, one of the most important books of feminism of the 20th century, it's infused with Marxist jargon from beginning to end. Wow. She was very much a neo-Marxist. She basically saw the subjugation of women as, for the most part, a function of capitalism. You've got to keep women having babies because you need more people to man the factories and keep creating wealth for the capitalists. That's why you need the family. That's sort of the short story there. But also we have to remember also that Marxism was not the only culprit that sort of tried to undo the family. Radical liberal individualism sought to do the same thing. So radical liberal individualism, which in some ways would have been as opposed to Marxism as many conservatives.
The opposite of collectivism.
Exactly the opposite of collectivism. It still said, well, you know something, we are, at the end of the day, we are individuals. No one should be hostage to any kind of institution or any other person without their consent. And therefore, if women are going to be truly autonomous individuals, then they can't be held hostage to this conception of the family, and they shouldn't even be held hostage to their own biology if we can overcome that. And in fact, technology has allowed us to overcome that. So not just sort of what you might call Marxism is the culprit of some of these negative social trends, at least social trends that you and I would consider quite negative, but also just individualistic liberalism. So, and I like what you called yourself earlier is what I would call myself. I call myself something of a conservative. I'm more comfortable with the term conservative rather than, say, a liberal, because various forms of liberalism have emphasized individualism and autonomy so much that even really good institutions and really good ideals like the family and human life just have to sort of fall by the side to the pursuit of individual happiness. And as conservatives, we believe that we are not just cogs in a collective, machine, but we believe that we are actual individuals. But we probably prefer the term that the Apostle Paul uses, not so much individual, but we are members. We are members of something bigger than us. So the Apostle Paul, we're members of a body. Well, the beauty of the Apostle Paul's analogy of us being members of a body, as opposed to just sort of the individual sort of atoms that classical liberalism tends to emphasize, is that we not only have individuality as members, the hand is not the foot, the head is not the leg, the head is the head, the hand is the hand, but at the same time, it points to the fact that we are still members of something greater than ourselves. We are members of families, we are members of communities, and you could argue that we are members of society. And the body metaphor says that we have to come to an understanding of social arrangement that accepts the fact that we do have individuality, but also that we are members of something greater than ourselves. And so that should avoid sort of hyper selfish views of economics and hyper selfish views of sort of the self-made person, as though people have success without having to attribute any of it to anything other than themselves. But it also completely destroys the idea that we are really just we have no meaning as individuals as apart from members of some great collective, which is what the great mistake that sort of historical Marxism has made. And so I think Paul's emphasis on us as members rather than individuals is a really helpful way of looking at political ideas in general.
I think you're right about the individualism. It's an argument that I encounter quite a lot when I'm debating abortion with people on Twitter, etc., is this hyper focus on me, myself, and my rights, my body, my organs. How dare you transgress any kind of autonomy or right that I have at all? And it takes complete ignorance of our responsibilities as well, to the world, to others, and to the child within. And they then, because it's hyper individualism, they think they can equate it to somebody needing an organ transplant. Do I owe somebody my body who needs a kidney transplant? Well, no, because you don't have a responsibility to that person. But you do have a responsibility to your children. This isn't a novel idea. Why is this a hard concept for you to get? You have a responsibility. You have reproduced a living human being. That responsibility is established, illustrated by the umbilical cord and the womb and all the other things that the baby's reliant on you for 9 months. That is your responsibility, inescapable. If you wanted a decision, if you wanted a choice, the time was before conception. But certainly, even if the conception wasn't your choice, that ship has sailed. You have a responsibility.
Well, I know you're right, and that language of radical individualism, that is not Marxism, as you said. That is radical liberalism, and so that's why we want to be careful about attributing everything that we think might have gone wrong to Marxism, because in actual fact, the anti-Marxist philosophies are partly culpable as well. And we always need to remember that we're neither Marxists nor liberals. We're Christians first and foremost. But yes, certainly, your point stands about the sort of the unborn, and in the case of and this actually comes back nicely to socialism. You see, you're quite right. The overwhelming number of abortions that take place are through because of consensual acts of sex. Yes. But of course, as you pointed out, there is a small minority, at least here in the developed West, of non-consensual sex acts which lead to conception and pregnancy. But that's okay, because in fact, we also believe, as being members of a body and just as Christians, that we have obligations to other human beings.
But it's a Christian ethic that transcends religious devotion. That's the basis of our law, is this natural law that we have an obligation to others. It doesn't require belief in God or going to church on Sunday. As many atheists tell us over and over and over again, they can be good people without belief in God. So I actually want to steer away from citing our faith as the authority. I absolutely believe in that, and some people are happy to start with that authority and end up with morality. But I think you can reverse engineer truth and objective morality and come back to religion eventually. So that is our Christian common law, even if it's not our Christian practice.
Yeah, I think I would tend to agree with you. I mean, you can talk about these things as a kind of natural law or human conscience, but I'm fond of doing that a lot.
I'm just thinking about those viewers of mine who may not share my faith, who say, well, look, maybe we're culturally Christian, but don't really care what the Bible says.
Yeah, I mean, and to those viewers, I mean, if they want to actually pursue this at a philosophical level, and they may not, and fine. But those who do, my first question to them would be, okay, on what grounds do you think that other people ought to also subscribe to this kind of what you might call cultural Christianity that you seem to be happy with? And if they would say, well, I couldn't offer any argument, then really you're sort of admitting that you have no right to expect anyone else to go along with these particular virtues and values and ideals that you accept. And then the question also is, well, why do you accept them? Do you really just accept them because it's part of our cultural baggage? Is that it? I mean, are you really just a vector for culture and tradition? Are you really that thoughtless? Because there is a kind of thoughtlessness in that way of thinking that basically says, well, look, something, this is the society I'm in. It has these values, and so I put them forward. It's a view that you often hear from, ironically, people on sort of what you might call the left. When you say to them, well, where do your values come from? When they might attack religion, you say, well, where do your values come from? And they'll say things like, well, society. Or they'll say, well, human rights. And you say, well, why do you believe in human rights? So they'll say things like, well, international law, the UN, and all they're really doing is just saying, something, there's this big entity that exists, and I'm just going to throw my lot in with it. Which doesn't strike me as any, I mean, it's sort of, what it shows is that society is their God. And you can't get any more conservative than that.
We've strayed off topic a little bit, but it's actually a really, really good one. Another topic that we're going to be covering at the Church and State Summit with Professor Augusto Zimmermann, dealing with what they're not teaching lawyers and judges anymore, but should be. But should be, and that's obviously natural law versus legal positivism. So we'll definitely cover that, because it's a really, really great way to. I want this for my viewers and for Christians and non-Christians out there to understand that it's a modern phenomenon which has resulted in an activist judiciary that is just giving us wild laws that bear little resemblance to justice. And that's why we're getting further oppression of a big government and judiciary. But what else? Just give us a bit of a teaser, a taste test as we wrap up of perhaps other areas that you possibly can discover when you come to the Church and State Summit and hear Dr. Stephen Chavura talking about cultural Marxism. Yeah,
well, what I'm going to try and do is shed some light on a lot of the debate that's going on around gender relations, male and female relations, things like the gender pay gap, but also other things like transgenderism and things that are being taught in the schools. I'm also going to discuss the thought behind things like hate speech movements and attempts to silence people who say things that are deemed politically incorrect. And all of this has a worldview behind it. It has, and the worldview, the particular worldview that I'm going to look at will be, what we might call something like cultural Marxism. So when you look at the state of free speech in developed democracies in Western society, you might say, when you look at what's being taught to children in the schools, when you look at the rapid changes taking place in terms of how we think about gender, what is driving all of this? Something is driving it, and it's being driven by people who subscribe to certain belief systems, one of which is cultural Marxism. So this thing is real, and it's really influencing people, and these people are getting into influential positions in governments all around the world, and they are having an influence on us because they are the ones writing laws and writing education curricula, laws and education curricula that we cannot escape, because, again, you cannot jump out of the moving car. And as Dave said earlier, you're either going to be in the driver's seat or in the passenger seat. And at the Church and State Summit coming up, we're going to teach you how to get into that driver's seat.
That's brilliant. That's a topic I'm really, really looking forward to, because it's such a deep one, and you're obviously so deeply studied on it that it'll be just brilliant to soak up some of that knowledge and then take it into the discussions and even just to have a better lens for the mainstream media's information that they're putting out and the political policies that come out. So I encourage you to jump onto churchandstate.com.au, grab your tickets now. There's still some early bird tickets left. That opportunity will end on the 15th of February. And even if you're not handy to Brisbane in Australia, wherever you are in the world, or Australia, you can, because Australia is in the world, you can get a video ticket. It's just $18 to be able to get the entire contents of the Church and State Summit and make sure that you benefit from all of that. So wherever you are, no excuse, get better informed and get better involved in arming yourself to influence culture. As Stephen said, we want to make sure that we're not just ignorant passengers along for a ride, not knowing where we're going and helpless to do anything about it.
Can I just say, I'm really looking forward to seeing you all at the Church and State Conference, and not even so much to talk to you as a sort of a speaker, but I'm really keen to get questions from you, and so we can just discuss things together. I want to hear what you guys have to say, and I want to be able to learn from you as well. I've always found that going to these kinds of conferences is fantastic for me, just to find out what's going on out there. And I'm really looking forward to talking with all of you, and not just from the podium, but also over lunch and morning tea. So I really hope to see lots of you there.
Thank you very much for your time, Dr. Stephen Chavura. We'll see you at the Church and State Summit.
Looking forward to it. Thanks, Dave.
Don't forget, you can subscribe to the updates and episodes that I have at davepellowe.com. Pellowe Talk is available following that username at Dave Pellowe on multiple social media sites, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, importantly on YouTube. But most important, don't forget to go to the website and sign up for the email updates. Now, the other thing that I want you to be aware of, and maybe download the apps for to your iPhone or Android, is a new social media channel called Parler, and that's spelled P-A-R-L-E-R, Parler. And what that actually does is it's actually still in its pre-launch kind of stage. There's lots of conservative people from America jumping on board. Heaps and heaps of alt media people, alternate media. It's promising to be the new Twitter, a Twitter for free speech, where unapproved opinions won't be censored, and you will be able to say what you want, and people won't be deplatformed simply for being right of Chairman Mao. So jump onto that. It's actually integrating with authors' websites. So my website, when you comment on a post beneath my website, it'll automatically go onto Parler, and vice versa. If you just using it like Twitter on your phone, the comments will automatically go beneath the article on the website as well. So there's a great deal of integration, and the most exciting thing is the lack of censorship that's been promised. So really looking forward to seeing you in the comments there, getting our conversations going, and joining that big community to make it bigger and have better conversations and see the genuine news without the corporate censorship. So don't forget, head to all of those social media channels, sign up, follow, and especially the website at davepellowe.com. Something else you might like to see on the website is the new t-shirt that I've just launched. And it's something that's designed to counter the propaganda of pro-abortion choice activists, because it actually has a large picture of a pre-born baby with the word fetus. Yes, a fetus is a living human, and calling it a different name other than baby doesn't change the fact of what it is. It is a living human. So wear that t-shirt, wear it proudly, and help save lives. That's it for this episode, and thanks for watching. I'll see you in the comments.